soon. Jolting tales of horror. Creepshow.
Welcome back to another wonderful episode of We Don't Know What to Watch. And with me, as always, the Vault of Horror to my Crypt Keeper, Kyle Mulford, and I'm Noah Saturn. Hey, Kyle.
I'm not even going to try and do that voice.
You're not going to do the Crypt Keeper? I was trying to come up with more puns. I couldn't think of them.
It's not so wonderful. Oh, hey, you know what? This is our first giant-size holiday episode.
This is our giant-size holiday special number 1.
And we both love horror movies, so what better holiday to start with than Halloween?
Yes.
Now let's just hope I can get this edited by Halloween.
Amen.
What did we watch?
Well, we watched the classic with the Holy Trinity of Horror, Creepshow from 1982, written by Stephen King, directed by George A. Romero, special makeup effects by Tom Savini. So
That's a triple win right there.
That is a triple header, a heck of a creative team.
This is an anthology movie.
Yes.
And there are 5 stories in here, and 2 of them were based on stories that King had written previously, which I want to say weren't actually published anywhere else, but he had just written them.
I think they might have been published somewhere else. I can't remember exactly. I'm sure you could look it up.
But then 3 of them were written for the movie.
Yeah, so King wrote the screenplay.
And so, being an anthology, should we get right into it?
Well, I think let's kind of explain the aesthetic. So Creepshow, the framing device is a comic book called Creepshow, which is very much heavily inspired by something like, Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror stuff by EC Comics from the 1950s. EC stands for Entertaining Comics, and they ruled the comic books for a brief period up until about 1955.
What's interesting is that EC Comics started out as educational comics?
Entertaining Comics, I believe.
No, it started out as educational comics by Max Gaines. And when he died in the 40s, his son William Gaines took over. And because he had Max Gaines had comics like stories from the Bible and all of this stuff. And then his son took over after he died. He got the company and he started doing more stuff from science fiction, military fiction,
true
horror
crime stories,
suspense,
horror stories,
crime fiction, and all this. And then he turned it into entertaining comics. And like you said, we got comics like Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror, and The Haunt of Fear are the 3 big ones that were popular. And then the Comics Code comes along and they start...
Especially with the book Seduction of the Innocent, of how comic books are evil and terrible. And then comic book creators had to go in front of the House Committee and say hey, no, Batman and Robin aren't gay. No, Superman is not a communist.
Yeah. And unfortunately, these things had to stop, like you said, around 55. And so they ended up stopping every comic they produced except for Mad Magazine.
And Mad Magazine was able to subvert the Comics Code because it was considered a magazine format as opposed to a comic book format.
Yeah. And so we had that forever until just recently that went. That was a sad day when I learned that Mad Magazine was gone. That was a large part of my childhood, was Mad Magazine.
I'm sure it'll come back. It can't keep down Alfred E. Newman.
Nope.
And of course...
What, me worry?
Of course, Mad Magazine was run by one of the big heavy hitters of comics, who, and we both read a lot of comics, was Harvey Kurtzman. He was an editor, and he worked with a lot of amazing talent from that era. People like Graham Ingalls, who was known as kind of ghastly Graham Ingalls, was sort of his nickname. He was great at horror stuff. And then Wally Wood, who was just a real character, would draw tons of stuff in his day. And Harvey Kurtzman would also draw some things himself. So a lot of great cartoonists. And, in Mad Magazine, it was always referred to as The Usual Gang of Idiots.
Yep. It was a great magazine while it lasted. So this movie got it took a lot of influence from EC Comics. I mean, even the Creepshow guy at the beginning of the movie
is referred to as the Creep in the comic itself.
Yeah, and he's very Crypt Keeper like the Tales from the Crypt.
He's got a ghostly kind of visage, like he's a skeleton, and then he's got like a robe or something.
Yeah. So, this did well. Opened in November of '82, and it made a total of $21 million at the box office, and it opened at number 1 the opening weekend. So,
nice. And
I think that I saw somewhere that it was the only movie that Romero directed that actually started at number 1. and oddly enough, I think it's the only movie he directed that he didn't write.
Interesting.
So,
well, to be fair, he outsourced it to Stephen King. So
yeah. And I think that they had been fans of each other and they wanted to work together, so they jumped at the chance to do this. And I'm glad that they did, because now we have Creepshow. This spawned 2 sequels. There was an '87 sequel that had 3 Stephen King stories, and the screenplay was by Romero. So they both wrote on that one, but someone else directed it. I think someone from the crew of the original directed that one. And then Creepshow 3 came out in 2006, and nobody from the original returned for that. So, and I don't think it did very well. I think people did not like it.
And then there's another argument to be made that Tom Savini worked a lot on Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, which was a TV show that some would call that one was the real Creepshow 3, but who knows about that one. The jury's still out. But now Creepshow is actually back. The IP is back as sort of an anthology television series on the Shudder app, and it just dropped today as of this recording, I believe.
Yes, so this recording will drop on October 31st, but we're recording on
sometime in September.
Sometime in September 26th, and it's today is, funnily enough, the day that Creepshow dropped on Shudder. So.
And Greg Nicotero is one of the big minds behind the new Creepshow, and of course he worked with Tom Savini and Rick Baker. So Greg Nicotero's done pretty well for himself. He's been the special effects wizard, him in his studio behind The Walking Dead. So I think he's going to be okay.
Yeah,
I hope it's good. I haven't seen it. I don't have Shudder. I might have to get it just to watch Creepshow, and a few other stuff I heard is okay on there.
So.
I suppose we should get into it.
End of the movie. Opens up with a prologue, like you do with you got like the bookends,
kind of the framing device.
Framing device. Sometimes with the anthologies, you'll get like in between each segment, there'll be like it'll go back to the framing device. This one happens to be like bookending a prologue and an epilogue.
But then sort of the in betweens are all supposed to look like you're going from story to story in a comic book.
Yeah, which is kind of one of the fun aspects of the movie. Is this movie is played for kind of a cheesy camp, but like also a little bit of horror too. So if you find it cheesy, it's played that way on purpose by the creators. So,
but primarily it's kind of like scaring yourself for fun. In there with the EC comics, sort of like you're reading a comic book story as a kid. And then, scary stuff is happening. There's always a twist ending, sort of almost in a Twilight Zone sort of way would be another.
Yeah, and the tagline for the movie is actually the most fun you'll ever have being scared. So
that's a great tagline.
Yeah. But in the prologue, we get a kid, actually Joe King, who you might now know as Joe Hill, Stephen King's son.
And who's now a great writer in his own right. He's written some comics.
He is.
He wrote Lock and Key. He's written some novels. I recommend his book, The Fireman, was very good.
Okay. I would highly recommend Lock and Key. It's fantastic. So he's a little kid in this, and his dad, played by Tom Atkins, who was a great, genre actor of the 80s, who was in The Fog, Escape from New York, Halloween 3, Night of the Creeps, and Maniac Cop. So if you're a fan of 80s horror, you know who Tom Atkins is.
Yep, you recognize that face.
Yep. And so he plays a dad, and he sees his son reading a Creepshow comic, and it's playing off the whole thing of how EC Comics got attacked in the 50s with those are bad for kids and blah blah blah, it's gonna ruin you and I'm gonna throw this garbage out, who reads this anyway? And the little Joe King says it's not any worse than the articles in your porno magazines. Which I found was apparently like possibly a reference to the fact that Stephen King used to write he started out writing stories for porno magazines. I don't know if it was Playboy or Penthouse or whatever.
Playboy, Penthouse, Hustler, that sort of era, especially in the 70s when he was first getting started.
And that makes sense because, I mean, another person who got their start in like Playboy was Shel Silverstein. So, which is really interesting because I grew up reading Shel Silverstein.
Yeah, Shel Silverstein, you think of kind of goofy stuff for kids, but got to start somewhere, I suppose. And they had a good literary era for it back then.
Yeah.
'Cause that's what you would do a lot. You'd start publishing stories in magazines.
So, when people said they used to read Playboy for the articles, it kind of was true sometimes in the 70s and 80s. Some of it was, there was some good stories and stuff in there. So.
I'm sure if you look on eBay, you could find a copy of which issue or whatever has certain stories in it.
Yeah. So the dad, Tom Atkins, throws out the comic book and then it opens up on the street and we go into the comic book.
We go into the comic with a really cool animated intro, and before that, we see that the little boy's in his room.
Oh, he says, "I hope you rot in hell,
yeah,
Dad."
And then you see, something starts, magic is starting going, the music starts up, and then you see the creep himself kind of go up and sort of put his, goes to the kid's window, almost like this weird Santa Claus sort of thing.
It's the Easter Bunny. Oh my God!
Exactly. He puts his fingers up to his mouth as in not to say anything to the kid, stay quiet.
And then he turns animated.
And then he turns animated and the film starts. And according to Tom Savini, I watched this movie with the commentary track with George Romero and Tom Savini. Highly recommend that if you're a fan of this film. A lot of fun stuff you learn. And in this one, you find out that the skeleton's name was Raoul.
Oh, I read that somewhere. They had names for like all the monsters.
Yeah, he names all of his props too.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to Fluffy later.
We'll get to Fluffy later, yeah. But yes, his name is Raoul, and things like make sense. So I would call him Raoul the Ghoul, but so.
And one thing I liked about this one went straight into. I was wrong. It wasn't like the comic in the street. It was Raoul coming to the window. Mm-hmm. But then it starts into the first segment. But then in between the segments, I liked because it kind of freeze framed at the end of each one, and then showed it as a comic book panel,
and then it would as a comic book panel,
and then it would flip through pages,
goes to the next one, and then there'd even be like text at the beginning. So I suppose if you wanted, you could pause the movie and read all the text it says in the comic.
But what I liked about it was it also showed like old ads you would find in the
it showed advertisements, even like a letters column where you write into the creep.
So I thought that was pretty fun. The animations and the segues and stuff were kind of fun in this movie. But the first story we go into is called Father's Day. And there's in most of the stories in here, there's at least one person you recognize. And this one we've got Ed Harris.
And this was Ed Harris right before The Right Stuff, which is sort of his first big breakout hit. And he had worked with Romero before in a movie called Night Riders. And
apparently Night Riders was Stephen King's first acting bit. So, and this was maybe his second movie.
Mm-hmm. We'll get to that later.
Yeah. So yeah, we got Ed Harris and his new wife going to his new wife's her family's estate, and her brother is there and her mom, and they're waiting for their grandma,
like the kooky aunt or the grandma.
Yeah, and then. Yeah, is it? Oh, maybe it was the aunt that was there, and she's telling the story of her mom and how it's she killed the father or her father.
Yeah, and then
because
that's why they always get together on Father's Day, because he was
an overbearing jerk.
Mm-hmm. But he had all the money, so she had to be nice to him, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
and then this was actually a lot of this movie was made around the Pittsburgh area, so in this particular scene was just like a house from the Pittsburgh area, and it was owned by a local guy who's kind of a weird dude who was like a big like wig maker. So this was a real mansion that this film was made in, owned by, and then there's a scene in this segment where they put like muddy footprints on, and then of course the owner of the house walked on screen. He's like, "Ah, what are you doing? Get rid of those muddy footprints." It's like, no, we need them for the shot or something.
Don't agree to let your house be used for a horror movie if can't handle a little mud and blood. So we get the old grandma coming in, and before she comes into the house, she always stops by the grave of her father, and she's all drunk on Jack Daniels or something, and some whiskey.
And there's an important scene where she's going, the father's always, it's called Father's Day. It's like, "Bring me my cake. I want my cake," or something like that.
"I want my Father's Day
Bedelia,
cake.
Bring me my Father's Day." Old man in the cane, just a real mean guy. And then, of course, his daughter and, the cook or the maid working together to put this cake together. And apparently, in case you were wondering, and I'm sure you were, Kyle, the cook's name was Mrs. Danvers.
Yes.
Which they believe to be a reference to. Mrs. Danvers was the name of the head maid in the Alfred Hitchcock film Rebecca, based on the novel by Daphne du Maurier, so you know.
Yes. I did realize it was Miss Danvers in there. So she, in the flashback, she kills her dad. And
of course, but there's one thing she goes through, and it's like, I'm tired of this, and then she looks at this kind of jade ashtray, and then she kind of hits him over the head and kills him with his ashtray.
And apparently that ashtray shows up in every segment.
Yes, that is the traveling ashtray. It pops up in every segment, including the closing. So
I didn't know that till after I watched the movie, so I'm going to have to watch it again and see if I can spot the ashtray.
Yeah, it's definitely something you can watch with friends. Like, there it is. And, they talked about, George Romero talked about, we put the ashtray at least once at every segment, because,
why not?
Just for fun.
Yeah. That's always fun to have little Easter eggs like that.
Yeah.
Especially in like an anthology movie, like if you have like one tying thing, like sometimes you'll have like one actor who shows up in every segment or what, that's but she's all yelling at the grave going, I killed you,
And then another thing you notice in this segment, and especially in this film, they use a lot of kind of like opticals, which they put these, almost make it look like comic book borders in front of Sims. Like in this one, you see an oval multiple times.
Yeah. She spills whiskey on the grave.
As you do. And in the commentary, they're joking about, it's like, well, maybe he's Irish and the booze woke him up, and that's why the...
because there's like some sort of... there's some sort of urban myth about that with is it the Irish? That's it?
I don't know. I mean, that's what they were joking about in the commentary, but...
Yeah. But yeah, so the whiskey wakes up the dead.
As it does.
And he kills her, and then...
And as he's coming out of this hole, apparently they dug a hole in this guy's backyard, because the cemetery was just this guy's backyard, because he had a big house and a big yard. And a few of the tombstones ended up in people's basements. They don't know, according to the commentary, they don't know where like the father's tombstone ended up.
Oh.
But people would just kind of nick these props, apparently. And what was fun about this is that there were three guys underneath, the three guys in the hole. One in the costume was, forget the guy's name. His name was Daryl. And he shows up in multiple segments under a lot of heavy makeup. So that's kind of funny that the same guy plays monsters in like every segment.
Oh, nice.
So it was him in the makeup, except for the shot with the maggots on him. For some reason, they put someone else in the costume for the maggot scene, because he was not a fan of maggots. And then there's also a guy running the smoke machine and a guy with the lights.
Awesome. I read somewhere that they used rice, but they also did use some real maggots in the scene. So they're waiting for the grandma, and she never shows up. So was it Ed Harris that goes out?
Yep, Ed decides it's a good idea to go out and
and look for her.
Go for a smoke, wander around. But then, of course, we got a scene of him dancing.
Yeah. And he goes out and looks for her, and doesn't he like falls into the grave or something like that, and she's and the grandma's laying in there, and apparently there's telekinesis too, because the gravestone gets like dragged onto him.
Gets smushed onto him or something.
So he gets killed, and then you got the last two, the remaining women in the house, and the aunt goes and looks in the kitchen or whatever, and she gets killed in there, and then we just had the woman left, right?
Yeah, just like 1 or 2 people left.
Yeah, and so they're going and looking around, and we get to the end of the thing where...
If you notice, there's ovals, so apparently ovals are bad in this episode.
Yeah, because then even the door...
Yeah, if there's oval, then you see a few ovals with optical effects.
Yeah, and when they have the flashback, I think he's in an oval too.
Yeah.
But then he comes out of the door, and it's the siblings are still left. And he goes, I want my Father's Day cake, and he comes out with a cake with the ant's head on it, and then it shows like, and then we get freeze frame on the brother and sister, and then that's the end.
Screaming with sort of this, apparently it was a scrim, and they put kind of red and blue lights behind him to get that effect at the end.
Yeah.
So almost kind of mimicking sort of the 4-color comics that you would have seen from that era. And, it's freeze frame guy, and then we go to the next story. But apparently, how they did it was that the woman was actually what it was. It was kind of a fake plate, but then she's actually still leaning. So the woman is actually leaning with her head on top of the plate, and then it's all just like covered in black underneath.
Oh, nice.
So apparently, George Romero said if you turn your TV brightness up too high, you can actually see your outline.
That's awesome. So yeah, we turn the pages and we get to a story... The
Lonely Death of Jordy Verrill.
Based on Stephen King's short story Weeds. And what do we get? We get almost a solo show. There is a doctor in there, but it's all Stephen King and his glorious acting.
Stephen King. And,
nunkhead.
Yeah, and George Romero kind of gave him the act like the coyote from the...
Yeah.
like Wile E. Coyote. And it really does have sort of a cartoonish feel to this short.
And the wide eyes.
It's kind of fun.
Yeah. It really is. Like, he's so goofy in this, but I think
very much has like a drive-in feel to it.
Yeah. He finds he sees a meteor crash in his field, and he just lives alone out in this like farmhouse type
somewhere
place
in Maine.
And he's like he gets these visions of going to the school, and it's like Department of Meteors. And he walks in the door, is like, oh, I'll pay $500 for that.
It was like $200.
Oh, it was $200. So he's like, oh yeah, this is a great idea.
That's a lot of money, $200.
I better get like a bucket or something to put this in. Mm-hmm. And he goes over, and the thing
it's
breaks.
Hot, so he touches it, and he's like, ooh.
And he keeps calling himself a nunkhead.
Oh, you Jordy Verrill, you nunkhead.
And he breaks his finger on the meteor, and then the meteor breaks open, and there's this blue ooze coming out of it, and he takes it inside, and now he has like a vision of him going into and they're like, I'm not paying nothing for that broken meteor. So he just sits on his couch or on his chair and watches TV, and
thinks about what to do, and then
he knows
asleep.
And then he wakes up and
it's
notices
like watching
like
pro
something,
wrestling or something, and that's
and he wakes up and notices something growing out of his fingers, and he keeps sucking on it, and
that's not good. So then he imagines going to the doctor. The doctor's played by the same guy as played in the meteor department.
Oh, yeah.
And I love is like they've got this sort of like, tilted angle on it. So it looks, it's all diagonal. So then the doctor just kind of rolls in like he's rolling down that angle. It's like, yes, Mr. Verrill, we'll take care of your fingers. It'll be very painful.
So then because of his imaginings, he's like, I'm not going to the doctor.
Then, of course, the answer to his problems, booze.
Grab a beer.
Falls asleep, and this is kind of, once he's inside, he stays inside. And if you notice, as the night goes on, and like, there's something green spreading into this man's yard. Space weed, space plants, or whatever.
Space weed. It's the stoner horror comedy.
I would watch that. Starring James Franco and Seth Rogen.
So you've got all this space weed growing all over the place, and he goes into the bathroom and and here's
notice, and then he has like this beard. It gets on his tongue, and then he's thirsty. So then he takes like a thing of orange juice, turns it into a screwdriver by pouring in vodka, drinks that.
Then he goes into the bathroom at some point, and he's like
it starts to get itchy, and he doesn't know what to do. He's like, oh.
He fills the tub with water, and then all of a sudden his disembodied voice of his dad says,
he sees his dad in the mirror.
You know, that's what they want, is some water.
But it itches so much. And then, of course, he pulls down his pants. He's oh, not there.
Oh, no. So he gets into the water, and then he wakes up the next morning. He's pretty much Swamp Thing.
Yes, and he's Swamp Thing, so
he's like,
oh, no.
Screw this, and I hope this works. And he finds a shotgun and blows his head off.
So the head, the guy out there laying down was not Stephen King. It was the same guy in the
nice
in the zombie suit. His name was Daryl. And I wish I remembered his last name. I'm sure I could look it up. But anyway, and how it worked is obviously it's not. His head isn't where his head is. So he's laying down, and when his head is actually like his top half of his body is actually out the door. Because he's leaned up against the door in the scene. So they just kind of built a hole in the door, and he's kind of laying out there.
That's awesome.
And they had to do it, and had to be careful when they're doing it. And then Tom Savini was up in the rafters at the top of the set. And, when they shoots it, he kind of pulls his head off. And then Tom Savini pulls his head off like a puppet, is what he said.
Oh, so there was no actual shot then? It was
a shot, there was a blank. But then they had to be careful. Well, they could do it a few times, because every time they did it, the suit would start to catch on fire.
That's awesome.
But then, of course, they didn't tell Daryl, the guy in the suit.
I wish I worked on horror movies in the 80s. There's so many creative, practical effects back then. But one fun little thing that they had with the end of this was then they show the outside, and just this space weed is growing all over the place. And then you see a sign saying, different places here and there, and the top one is Castle Rock, like 5 miles this way or whatever. And so Castle Rock is a town that Stephen King uses in many of his stories.
He used it in
Needful Things.
Needful Things was the last one.
The last story.
He used it in Cujo, and I think the first one might have been The Dead Zone. There's a couple other ones. You could probably read them in order. And then now there's a Hulu series called Castle Rock about all the weird things. It's basically...
Shawshank was there.
And Castle Rock was the name of Rob Reiner's production company. So, and he made... And, so then he worked on some stuff there. So Castle Rock, it's everywhere.
Yeah. So I thought it was a good little nod to his books, too. It was fun. Mm-hmm. Then that's our freeze frame, I think, was the Castle Rock sign. And
yep.
And then we
kind of go past some ads, and then we notice at one point you see something for something you get like a mail-in thing, and there's one. If you notice, the one at the bottom is cut out, so it doesn't say Voodoo Doll, it says Voodoo something.
Oh, I thought that was at the very end when they noticed that.
You see it multiple times, once in the animation transition.
Oh, okay.
And then once at the very end.
Okay. And then we
get
the
ashtray in Jordy Verrill is on his it's right next to him, right next to his chair. On a desk or like an end table or something.
Okay. And then we get to the story, Something to Tide You Over.
This is probably the genuinely creepiest one.
with Leslie Nielsen and Ted Danson.
What a combo.
That was an interesting combo. So you got Leslie. It opens up with Leslie Nielsen storming into Ted Danson's apartment and yelling at him for sleeping with his wife and all this, and Ted Danson's the ladies' man. He's Sam Malone.
Yeah,
he can't help it.
And so Ted Danson, who's Sam Malone, also plays Michael on The Good Place. So he's very also nice long career. And then Leslie Nielsen is
3 Men and a Baby.
Oh yeah, it was 3 Men and a Baby, of course. So and Leslie Nielsen is probably now most remembered for his comedy, but he did do some serious films. If you go back into the 60s, he was in Forbidden Planet.
Yes. And we have mentioned on this podcast before Day of the Animals. Where he fights a grizzly bear shirtless.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, so he's mad at Ted Danson for sleeping with his wife, and so it's like, I'm gonna get revenge on you, and takes him out to a beach and says, your wife's out here somewhere, and you got to dig a hole here or whatever. And then he ends up putting Ted Danson in a hole and burying him up to his neck in sand.
So how they did this effect I thought was interesting. So they did sort of like a part of a hole, but then Ted was actually sitting down in a chair, and they did kind of put almost like a frisbee, sort of like a disc around his neck, and then they covered the disc with sand, so it just looked like he was obviously, he wasn't really buried there. So he was fine, he was comfortable, he was just kind of...
And they built like a tank or something, and didn't he have like he said that they put like something down for him to breathe in, and then they'd take it out, and then they'd film him. Yeah, that was
kind of one shot for later. Then the one thing they also would do, and then you see him later with kind of the tide slowly coming in. Obviously, it's not the real tide. What they did was kind of like a wave pool generator sort of thing in a tank.
Yeah.
So they did that when him and then the wife were also both slowly get buried under by the tide, since the title Something to Tide You Over.
So you see that you find out that both...
I love how like Leslie Nielsen even takes the time to put out like a TV.
Yeah.
So then he could watch like his lover drown.
Yeah. And he goes back to his house. Like, this is a beach. Like, he's got a beach house, and this is his beach or whatever. And
the beach that they went to, the movie was mostly shot in Pittsburgh. The beach was in New Jersey.
Jersey. It's the Jersey Shore. So he goes back to his beach house, and he's got like video monitors everywhere.
Yeah, he kind of hits a button and like on a painting slides up, and he's got video monitors, tons of videotapes of like. And you kind of wonder how many times has he done this?
Yeah,
it's an elaborate setup for this too.
He's like, you're just gonna have to hold your breath until the tide washes the sand away, and you can get out of it. And Ted Danson's like, I can hold my breath a long time. And then we cut off.
At one point we see slowly, he's kind of yelling at the monitor and the camera.
Then we get an underwater shot of him, drowning.
Shot of him, and that was shot more back in, because all the interiors were done back in Pittsburgh, because the set was built in a high school gymnasium, the whole interior of that house.
Nice.
And Tom Savini said when they were shooting that scene, basically what he would do, he would just sleep on the couch on that set, because it was a pretty nice set. And then spend his nights just on the set, on the couch. And because it was a high school gymnasium, you just like go to the locker rooms, take a shower, and go to the bathroom.
So speaking of taking a shower, Leslie Nielsen goes in to take a shower, and then he comes out, and there's Ted Danson.
He's seeing things, hear things. Yeah. And later he goes like, "Oh, this sounds kind of weird." You hear like footprints and weird sounds, and then he goes to get his gun, and of course when he gets his gun out of the drawer, you see, there's the ashtray again,
the infamous ashtray.
Mm-hmm.
And then he finds seaweed zombie Ted Danson and his seaweed zombie wife. And he starts shooting him. He's like, "You can't kill us. We're already dead."
Come down to the beach. And apparently before they went on set, when they were just in their seaweed style costumes, they were doing like these very kind of like hillbilly accents. And Tom Savini and the rest of the crew were just cracking up so much. So they asked them, "Please do it on camera. Just do one take of it, please." But they didn't do it. And I wish we could see them doing it like, "Oh, apparently you tried to drown us."
Apparently Ted Danson said that, I don't know if it was his daughter or his niece. I don't know if he has kids. Something like a daughter or a niece or something was on the set, and she was young, and he didn't want to scare her. So like he tried to avoid her the whole time. And then finally, like towards the end of the day, she saw him and was like, "Oh no, I think it was his daughter." Cause she was like, "Oh, hi, Dad." So, and he's sitting there trying to avoid her all day because he doesn't want to scare her with the makeup
costume or whatever.
Yeah, and then they grab Leslie Nielsen and they give him his comeuppance and drown him the same way.
Right on the beach, and it ends with, "I can hold my breath for a long, long time." And apparently And I like the scene, where he starts screaming, but then he just kind of goes past screaming and just starts laughing and going crazy. And apparently something Leslie Nielsen would do to crack others up on the set is he would carry around like a fart machine that would just kind of make these fart noises. Which sounds like the most Leslie Nielsen thing you can do.
Yeah. So then we go to the next story. Turn the pages to The Crate. And this one might have been another one that was... Yeah, this was also based on a short story called The Crate. This one was a little bit longer, it seemed.
I think this one's a little longer and probably one of the best segments that most people think.
Yeah.
And the guy who edited this set, Paul something, I can't remember his last name. He also was one of the editors. He worked on Star Wars, so...
Oh, nice. We have a guy that's a professor or whatever, and he played by Hal Holbrook, and he doesn't seem very confident, and his wife is always what would you do without me?
Like
she's just
laying into him all the time.
She's loud and obnoxious.
Ultra
and
nag.
Yeah, and he hates it, but like he can't stand up for himself or whatever. And and then we cut back.
He's got his friend Fritz Weaver. They're at this party. And then, like one of the guys at the party was also like the set decorator.
Oh, nice. And one of the guys at the party is also a professor and his friend. And he gets called back to the school because...
Like, hey, there's something weird here.
Yeah, we found something. And I actually like this call back to the creature. Like, I don't know if it was intentional reference to The Thing, but like the guy at the school finds a box under his stairs and it's labeled Arctic Expedition, June 19th, 1834. So, like, it's some creepy thing they found in the Arctic.
It was like Carpenter or something was on the name.
Actually, did you see recently there was an article about something they dug up in the Arctic, like for real?
Yeah.
And Wilford Brimley actually tweeted out the article and said something about, trust me, guys, you don't want to do this.
Nice.
But... yeah, so they found this thing and there's it's chained shut with padlocks and they get it open and
so they had the first thing they do, they take it to like a nearby like lab room because it's underneath the stairs, kind of stuck behind a wall. You can barely notice it. Kind of go take out these ancient chains, take it off, and then kind of slowly crack it open, undo the nails, and then of course. Rah! This big weird monster comes out, and it's Daryl again, the same guy.
It's Fluffy.
And this monster was nicknamed Fluffy by Tom Savini. So,
and it's a pretty cool monster. Apparently, he had to call another special effects guy that he'd worked with before because this was his first time doing animatronics.
Yes, he had never done like an articulated monster before. So if you listen to the commentary track, he has a really interesting story kind of about how he had another guy walking through it on the phone over an hour and a half, and then he later went to someone's house and just kind of saw a monster, something I recognize, I don't remember what. It's like, because he could actually see what the monster was, how it looked. It was actually, and the guy who worked on The Howling, he saw one of the big, like the John Carradine werewolf.
Cool. Yeah, The Howling had some interesting effects.
So based off of that, it's like, that's how you do it.
Cool. Yeah, it was a cool monster. So I like the design. It's like just a big furry thing with like just these really massively sharp teeth. And it's just like, patooey chomp. Patooey chomp.
And then one of them, with these big claws. And so Fluffy, there were two Fluffies. One was sort of a suit with, more articulated animatronics. And then one other one was had rubber teeth. Because obviously when it bites into someone, actually biting someone, you don't want to actually hurt someone, but the real teeth were actually kind of sharp and they could cut you.
Oh, crazy. But so this happens and the guy who discovered the thing gets eaten. And then the professor...
poor janitor.
The janitor. And then the professor goes back to his professor friend and says,
before that he freaks out and kind of runs into a poor grad student.
Oh, yeah.
He goes like, hey, you gotta go see this. And the grad student goes down, kind of sneaks back into there. And then, of course, the poor grad student gets eaten. There's blood everywhere and all this other gross stuff, a pair of glasses. And, Fluffy goes back in his crate, as always. And I do like the fact that, then you slowly see kind of Fluffy kind of in the crate, slowly moving his arm so he could go back underneath the stairs.
Yeah. And then after the grad student death, then the professor's like, oh shit, and he goes back to his other professor friend, and he's like,
he is just gone. His mind is gone bye-bye, freaking out. And Halbrick
monster killed everybody.
George Romero said this was like the one part in the scene where he's told Hal, like, tone it down. Just for this scene. And he does. He plays it kind of quiet and subtly. But then you really... this movie definitely relies on the acting of Adrienne Barbeau, maybe?
Adrienne Barbeau.
Adrienne Barbeau, who plays Wilma the wife. And then, of course, Fritz Weaver, who plays the professor friend. And then Hal Holbrook. This segment would not work without their performances. And they talk a lot about their performances in the commentary track. Just Hal Holbrook, because he's been doing this for a very long time.
Yeah.
Professionally, especially known for playing, kind of going on tour in character as Mark Twain. Kind of what he's most famous for, kind of doing all this kind of this Mark Twain stories, that sort of thing. And so this was the first time George Romero said this was the first time I worked with like real professionals for this segment. And then he talked about how he gave him a stage note and then he actually took it and that made him happy. But then another thing we missed is, throughout this short, there's kind of these two moments where he fantasizes about killing his wife. The first time is when they're back at the party and she's talking, and then you just kind of see him open his jacket and he pulls out a revolver and just kind of shoots her right in the head and everyone else claps.
Because honestly, she's just annoying the hell out of everybody. You can tell. Yeah, so he hears the story and
of course he boozes up his friend. Friend freaks out, and he slips him some drugs. Friend is gone.
And he goes to the school and finds.
And then he
thing.
realizes, like, okay, like if this really is a monster here, I gotta go check it out. Checks it out. Writes a nice note to his wife because she's gone. And then he realizes, like, okay, if I'm gonna do this, this is my only chance to get rid of my wife.
So he gets her to come to him at the school.
And there's a great scene kind of intercutting between her getting home and then him sort of cleaning up all the blood, making things looking like, so then otherwise she wouldn't notice anything.
Yeah. So he's cleaning up everything and putting the boxes back under the stairs. And she gets to the school and he's like, I'm down in the basement by the lab. And she comes down and she's like, what are you doing down here? And she's like, you got to check out this thing in here. No, there was a grad student that got really upset about something and I can't talk to her. So I need you to come and talk to her because you're good at this stuff. And because she's always, what would you do without me? Mm-hmm. So she goes under and
looks at it, but then like the crate and then nothing happens. So then, of course, he's just like, Wilma, he's finally kind of lays into her. And then I like the point he's actually like, pushing her back and forth. So he's almost like tapping her, hitting her against the crate itself, trying to wake up Fluffy.
Yeah.
And then nothing happens. And this is probably the best part, I think, is because then he's like, okay, we know Fluffy's in the crate. We know he's going to come out eventually. We don't know when. And that's when the suspense of this short really just kind of goes up and up and up and up, because the longer, this is like classic, this is Hitchcock style suspense storytelling, because we know it's going to happen, we don't know when, so then you're slowly just getting more and more scared of when's it going to happen, and then she lays into him, hitting him with a purse, and then just at the moment you think nothing's going to happen, surprise. Fluffy comes out behind her, they look at each other, and then of course, nom.
And he finally got rid of his wife.
And then at the end of the short, there's another great moment of suspense where he's trying to like, okay, now what do I do? He has to, grab a padlock and kind of lock him back up because he doesn't.
And then of course he struggles with the chain and the padlock, and you don't know if he's gonna make it now. Like, is he gonna get eaten too? Is that gonna be the end of the story? I don't know.
He successfully locks it back up, puts him in the car, throws him into like a water reservoir or something.
Goes back and wakes his friend up and tells him, hey, it's been taken care of. Mm-hmm. And then we go back to the crate at the bottom of the reservoir, and the monster bursts out of there.
You see the eyes come out of there, and then that's the end of that short. So a fun thing about the crate itself, the crate is still around, and there are more than one crate. And when it goes into the water, it's actually a miniature crate going into the same water tank that they use for something to tide you over.
Oh.
And then another crate, and then the real crate they use that Tom Savini had, he kept it, but then it still has blood on it, like dried blood on it.
Oh, nice.
Fake blood. And then he gave the crate to Greg Nicotero, and as a trade for Gort, as in Gort, the robot from The Day the Earth Stood Still. And according to Tom Savini, he has Gort in his bedroom.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then Greg Nicotero used the crate as like a toy chest for his kid.
That's scary. Does he have like a miniature Fluffy in there?
I like to imagine so. But what I really like about, and then all these, because you remember these guys are these kind of makeup masters and special effects artists. They're movie fans themselves, so they have all these kind of fun stuff. And I know if you've ever seen, there's a few like kind of shorts about people touring the inside of Guillermo del Toro's house, and he's got all these kind of cool, fun horror memorabilia and horror monsters around.
That'd be cool.
So if you I'd say look that up. There's kind of a fun stories of just him kind of touring around his house, looking at all these kind of weird things he has. He's got like a big Frankenstein statue and all these other fun stuff.
Nice. All right, so we leave the crate and we come to our final story. They're creeping up on you. And this is mostly solo acting too.
Yes.
We've got this this sterile apartment, just all white, tile floor.
Kind of this germaphobe lives here, and he's got he's wearing like gloves and everything, and he's got a jukebox,
and that's it, and his computer and his phone for work.
It's kind of this weird computer interlude, and he kind of controls everything automatically. You can call people, and then of course you see something kind of weird.
Well, and first of all, he's like this asshole douche that like the only calls he gets is from his assistant, and then from angry people that are mad because he lost their family's money or whatever.
Yeah,
so.
He's like some stock guy, rich jerk dude.
Yeah, and he sees a bug in his apartment, and he's calling up because he hates bugs.
Mm-hmm. Not just any bug, cockroach.
A cockroach, la cucaracha. And so he calls up the janitor or whatever of the building and asks for him to come up, and they're like, it's like 10 o'clock at night, dude. He's like, I want it done now. What do I pay this for? Rent and everything, whatever.
Kills the cockroach, puts it in like this weird garbage disposal thing, and then takes care of that and just starts to get frazzled.
And then there's we get a storm outside. He looks out the window, and like this blackout or brownout goes all across the town, and happens in his apartment too. And then when it comes back on, he sees more cockroaches got into the apartment, and so eventually there's more to it, but like this one is pretty basic. Like eventually he goes into this panic room type thing where he's got like a bed and it's sealed off, but when he gets in there, he finds out and seals himself in. He finds that the cockroaches have invaded there.
Cockroaches are coming from everywhere, from the computer, from the sink.
They apparently used like 150,000 or 250,000 real cockroaches for this.
And George Romero said the set stunk because when a cockroach gets scared, it kind of drops everything, and then so it can move faster. So it smelled bad, and with real cockroaches.
And so he's in this room, and cockroaches got into there, and they just start attacking him. And then it cuts to the next morning or whatever, and the janitor comes up. He's like, "Are you there? Are you there?"
And he sees it's all cockroaches, and the cockroaches come out of his nose, come out of his head,
and then they're like kind of bursting out of his skin, which was a cool effect.
And that effect, that was just toilet paper.
That's awesome. So that's the thing. Is like they were really creative with that stuff and made it look good.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and the story of kind of, because you can get cockroaches in a catalog, but they were like 50 cents a roach. So when you have this many roaches, you don't want to get can get kind of expensive.
Oh, and apparently this was the most expensive part of the movie to make because
Mm-hmm.
it's like $150,000 just for the roaches.
But what they did do to save money is they sent 2 guys from the crew down to Trinidad, and they found like some wild roaches.
Oh,
Because apparently what you would do is like put like a bucket down in this shadowed area, shine a light, and you take it out, and then that's how you get a bunch of your roaches. But then they had to bring it back to the U.S. And how they got through customs was like, we're making a movie for Stephen King. It's like, oh, okay, go ahead.
oh. That's great. Oh, the things they just let them do.
And in this one, our good old traveling ashtray is...
Was it on his desk somewhere?
Yeah, it's a soap dish.
Okay.
In this one. And then we forgot about it in the crate. And the crate, it's also just sitting on a desk as an actual ashtray.
Okay.
Believe in Hal Holbrook's apartment.
Awesome. So that was the end of the segments. And then
And that's probably the most visceral run, is like they're creeping up on you.
Yeah.
Because, they're roaches. Roaches are kind of creepy.
They're kind of creepy. For me, it was kind of the most forgettable one.
Mm-hmm.
It was just it was about as bland as the room it was set in.
I liked it. I think it's really strong. It's got a nice, from like almost like a stomach, you want to puke sort of thing.
Yeah, the end of it was. But I just got sick of him just yelling
Very
on the phone.
simple, sort of like, it's a very simple story, like, asshole guy doesn't like cockroaches, gets killed by cockroaches.
Yeah.
And apparently how they got the cockroaches to sort of stay in line was they would put like small lines of Vaseline and the cockroaches wouldn't cross
Oh, cool.
these lines of Vaseline. And for cockroaches coming out of the sink, they put like a false bottom in the sink, and then people just kind of throw cockroaches through. And for some of the shots, they would just throw a bunch of cockroaches. You'd focus the camera on like 6 inches away from you. We throw a bunch of cockroaches down, try and get them. And then I do like, there's a couple of shots where there's and occasionally there's a bunch of small cockroaches, and like you see 1 or 2 big guys who just. And then, even in the commentary, George Romero's like, oh, there's the big guy. This really big cockroach.
Nice. So we flip our pages, and then we cut to the street.
Because the comic
Where
book
the comic book
blew into
was,
the
and
street.
We got a couple of
2 goofy garbage men played by Marty Schiff and
Tom
Tom
Savini.
Savini. It's kind of fun. You kind of see them. They're goofing around, doing bits, throwing stuff to each other, having fun.
And they're looking through the magazine. They see
find,
see
the comics, like,
the X-ray specs and
they see this stuff, and they look like they go to the comic book, and then Tom Savini has headphones on or something. It's like, what's this? It's a comic book. What? It's a comic book. I read these when I was a kid. Oh, cool. I look through it. And then, of course, we see in this physical comic book, which someone still has.
Yeah. They actually made a comic book
They
for
did
the
make
movie.
a comic for this movie, and there was reprinted in 2017, so you can get it on Amazon or something for like $15. It's about 68 pages. Does come with all the stories, just like in the film. And in that one, art duties were done by Bernie Wrightson. He's a very good comic book artist, known for co-creating Swamp Thing and doing an incredible his own version of Frankenstein.
Well, and wasn't the cover done by one of the guys who actually worked for EC Comics?
It might have been. I didn't hear that.
Okay. So, yeah, they're looking through the comics, and they got to mention X-ray specs because back in the 80s, back in the 80s, you always have like the X-ray specs in the back, and sea monkeys. There was always sea monkeys.
Yeah.
I think I ordered sea monkeys once and they didn't work.
Nice. You killed them?
Yep. So, but then they get to a page, it's like, ooh, a voodoo doll. Oh, someone's already ordered this. It's been cut out. So then we cut back into the house, and Tom Atkins is complaining about a bad back and is like, oh, my back is so sore. And we go upstairs, and we've got little Joe King just jabbing a voodoo doll with a pin.
How's this? Or like, this ridiculous.
So, and then that's the end of the movie.
And then, just like all the other segments, kind of freeze frame, zooms out as a comic book panel. Didn't see us the end of the book, and we sort of are brought out by our good friend, the Creep.
The Creep, Raoul.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Creepshow.
So yeah, I really like Creepshow. It's a lot of fun.
This is a great one to bring out at Halloween. Like you said, it's fun. It's got some horror. It's got some good effects. So it's not like just a family friendly fun movie, but like but it is still fun.
It's fun, scary, as opposed to like scary, if that makes any sense.
And it would be a good one if you get together to like with some friends on Halloween to watch a fun movie on Halloween. This would be a great one to watch because you've got 5 different stories. You've got like actors most people are going to know in there, and names and faces they know. Fun comic book style to it. Lots of
especially
cool
since
colors
comic
and
book movies
special
are
effects.
big now.
Yeah, that's true. That's another reason that this might go over well with today's crowd too. Just a super solid movie, and with Romero and Stephen King working on it, and Savini doing effects, you've got quite the setup there. So
great caliber of talent, great pedigree.
So yeah, that's our recommendation for this first giant size holiday special.
I would definitely recommend Creepshow. It's a great movie to pop in every year. Yeah, watch it with some friends.
And till we get back to our regular scheduled programming,
I guess what would you recommend?
I didn't really think anything with this one. I didn't know if we were doing recommendations for I suppose. Why don't you come up with a recommendation for this one?
Well, the obvious one I think would be Trick or Treat. Trick or Treat.
Dang it. I should have taken that one.
And that one definitely has the same basic setup, even with these sort of comic booky transitions going through. And that's a great one. Never got a theatrical release for that one. But then that one's kind of brought together by this kind of mysterious little trick-or-treater named Sam.
Sam Hain. Yeah.
I'd recommend that. And that was kind of fun because those, the gimmick with that one, it all takes place on Halloween night. And even some of the same characters kind of intersect with all the different segments of that one.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool little anthology movie itself. Yep. And the funny thing is like it's an anthology movie that doesn't feel like an anthology movie because they're moving throughout this town. So it's just going from one house to another house to like just different families and then kids. And then so it's not set up. It's a different kind of setup for an anthology. The stories just kind of weave together.
They're definitely all interlocking because sometimes, one person is the main character, then you see a side character, another one, then you come back later in the movie, and then the side character is now the main character, and the other character comes back as a side character. So
yeah, so it's really interestingly done, and that's another. I think that came out like 2007 or something like that.
Yes.
That's not to be confused with Trick or Treat from the 80s, but no, I would definitely recommend that one as well. I'm gonna go with just stealing yours there because I'm having trouble coming with anthologies. Are a hard one. There's not a lot of great anthologies. There's some with 1 or 2 great segments, but there's always a few bad ones in there.
Mm-hmm.
I would say Trick or Treat is great all the way through. Creepshow is pretty much great all the way through, and besides that, there's not a lot of anthologies.
Not quite really horror, but I think Twilight Zone the movie.
Yes, that one would be a good recommendation too if you're going anthology.
Because that one has, I believe, Toby Hooper directing one segment, and then Steven Spielberg directing another segment.
John Landis,
and that one, of course, is just basically where they just remake a bunch of classic episodes like.
Terror at 20,000 feet.
Terror at 20,000 feet, with John Lithgow taking the place of William Shatner. And then Dan Aykroyd's in it too for some reason.
There's a gremlin on the wing.
So yeah, I'd recommend that one. So kind of in the same era. It's a good double feature. Twilight Zone, not quite as horror based. Twilight Zone has a lot of horror, but then there are also more kind of weirder fables and a bit more of a sci-fi bent, depending on how you look at it.
Here's another recommendation I would go with is since this was inspired by EC Comics, I would just say Tales from the Crypt, but that was a TV series. I'll go with a movie, and I will actually go with the first Tales from the Crypt. Well, actually, there was a Tales from the Crypt movie from the 70s, and then that spawned a sequel. But Tales from the Crypt, they created these movies that had like the opening from Tales of the Crypt, but then it was a full movie instead of an anthology.
Oh, like Tales from the Crypt Presents or something?
Yeah, and the first one was called Demon Knight with a insane Billy Zane, and I think William Sadler is in it, and who else is in it? I can't think of who all is in it, but just this fun little demon trying to get into a hotel with different characters in the hotel and all this. It's a lot of fun. And like I said, Billy Zane is just insane as like the leader of the demons and all this stuff. So I would recommend Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight.
Yeah, and until then, stay spooky.
Until then, I think it's dead time.
I can't really do the voice.